There is a city in the United States where every single November the sun sets once and doesn't rise again for over 2 months. No road connects this place to anywhere else in the state. It's colder, darker, and more isolated than almost anywhere else Americans actually call home. And yet, this exact city may also run one of the wealthiest local governments per person anywhere in the entire country. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how both of those things are true at the same time. Let's take a closer look. This is Utqiaġvik, formerly known as Barrow, sitting right on the Arctic Ocean at the very northern tip of Alaska, further north than any other city in the United States. Roughly 4,500 people live here, most of them Iñupiat, whose families have called this exact stretch of coastline home for well over 1,000 years. Stay with me until the end, because the way this city actually funds itself is one of the strangest, least known economic stories in all of America. Archaeological evidence places Iñupiat settlement in the area now called Utqiaġvik as far back as roughly 500 AD, making this one of the longest continuously inhabited places anywhere in North America. A community that has survived and adapted here for well over 1,500 years, sustained by whaling, sealing, and fishing in some of the harshest coastal conditions on the planet. The original name, Utqiaġvik, is generally translated as the place where owls are hunted, or a place for gathering wild roots, reflecting a landscape and way of life shaped entirely around what this specific stretch of Arctic coastline could provide. British naval officers charting the Arctic coastline in the 1820s, working under Sir John Barrow of the Admiralty, gave the nearby headland the English name Point Barrow, a name that over the following century gradually became attached to the settlement itself, which came to be known simply as Barrow. Under that name, the town grew steadily through the 20th century, shaped by whaling, missionary settlement, and eventually military and scientific installations built during and after the Second World War, including a naval Arctic research laboratory that gave one section of town its lasting nickname, still used by residents today. In 2016, after a formal referendum, the city's residents voted to officially restore its traditional Iñupiat name, becoming Utqiaġvik once again, a deliberate act of reclaiming an identity that predates any English name by well over 1,000 years. Understanding what daily life actually looks like in a place with a history this long, in conditions this extreme, is where we're headed next. Here is the fact that separates Utqiaġvik from almost every other city in the United States. There are no roads connecting it to the rest of Alaska. None. The only way in or out is by airplane, or, for cargo, by barge, during the brief summer window when Arctic Ocean ice retreats enough to allow shipping. A city of 4,500 people is, in the most literal sense, an island connected to the mainland only through the sky. And then there's the darkness. Each year, the sun sets in Utqiaġvik around November 18th or 19th, and simply doesn't rise again until January 23rd. That's 65 days of continuous polar night. Months during which residents live entirely without a sunrise, working, going to school, and running an entire city government through weeks of unbroken darkness, broken only by a few hours of pale twilight around midday. The reverse happens every summer. From roughly mid-May through early August, the sun never sets at all. More than 80 consecutive days of round-the-clock daylight, a rhythm so different from the rest of the country that residents describe entirely different sleep patterns, entirely different daily routines, built around a sun that simply doesn't behave the way it does almost anywhere else Americans live. It's a level of isolation and environmental extremity that would make it reasonable to assume Utqiaġvik is also one of the poorest, most under-resourced places in the entire country. And that assumption would be almost completely wrong, which is exactly the surprising economic story we need to get into next. Utqiaġvik sits at the administrative heart of the North Slope Borough, a municipal government covering an enormous stretch of Arctic Alaska that happens to include a significant share of the state's oil infrastructure, including operations connected to Alaska's North Slope oil fields and the nearby National Petroleum Reserve. Because the North Slope Borough has the legal authority to levy property taxes on that oil infrastructure, this remote Arctic municipal government collects a genuinely enormous tax base relative to its tiny population. The result is a level of municipal funding that would be almost unthinkable for a city this size and this isolated almost anywhere else in America. The North Slope Borough has, at various points, been described as one of the wealthiest local governments per capita in the entire United States, funding schools, ice rinks, ambulance and fire services, and infrastructure investments that many far larger, far more accessible American cities simply cannot afford. This creates a genuinely striking contrast. A community facing some of the most extreme environmental conditions inhabited anywhere in the country, sustained economically by tax revenue from an industry most of its residents will never personally work in, funding public services most Americans would never expect to find above the Arctic Circle. Alongside that oil-driven municipal wealth, subsistence hunting and fishing remain economically and culturally central for most residents. Whaling, sealing, walrus, and caribou hunting and fishing continue to supply a meaningful share of the food many households rely on, existing side by side with wage employment in government, education, and healthcare. It's an economy running on two entirely different systems at once: an ancient subsistence tradition and one of the more unusual tax-funded municipal budgets anywhere in America. For all the modern infrastructure that oil tax revenue has funded, subsistence whaling remains, by most accounts, the single most culturally significant activity in Utqiaġvik. Each spring, Iñupiat whaling crews launch skin-covered boats called umiaks into leads that open in the sea ice, hunting bowhead whales under strict cultural protocols passed down across countless generations, following an ancient tradition that long predates any American or European presence on this coastline. A successful hunt isn't simply an economic event. It triggers Nalukatak, a community-wide spring whaling festival where the harvest is formally shared across the entire town according to traditional distribution customs, a practice that reinforces exactly the kind of interdependence and shared resource system that has allowed a community this size to survive in this environment for over 1,000 years. The whalebone arch, standing on the shore near the Arctic Ocean, built from an actual bowhead jawbone, has become one of the most recognizable symbols of this tradition. A physical landmark, residents and visitors alike associate directly with the whale hunt that has defined this community's relationship with the ocean since long before the town had any other name. This blending of ancient subsistence practice with a heavily oil-funded modern municipal government produces a version of daily life that doesn't fit neatly into any conventional category. It's neither a purely traditional subsistence community nor a purely modern American town. It's something genuinely specific to this exact place, shaped by both an ancient whaling economy and a very modern industrial tax base at the same time. Because of the North Slope Borough's unusual oil tax-funded budget, employment in Utqiaġvik looks considerably different than it would in a comparably remote town almost anywhere else in the country. A significant share of jobs here exist directly within borough government, the school district, and public health services, public sector positions funded largely by that oil property tax revenue rather than by any conventional local business tax base. The borough's spending has, over recent decades, funded genuinely substantial infrastructure investment for a community this size and this remote. Modern schools, a recreation center, upgraded water and sewage systems built to withstand permafrost conditions that make conventional infrastructure extremely difficult to construct and maintain, and emergency services capable of operating through 65 days of continuous winter darkness. Beyond direct borough employment, indirect economic activity connected to the oil industry, logistics, transportation, support services for nearby extraction operations provides another significant source of local income, even though the actual extraction itself takes place well outside town on the surrounding North Slope. None of this eliminates the practical challenges of life here. Nearly everything not produced or hunted locally has to be flown in, making the cost of many goods significantly higher than in the rest of the country. But the presence of that oil tax base fundamentally changes what would otherwise be one of the most under-resourced remote communities in America into something considerably more economically stable, which raises the obvious next question. How does anyone actually reach a place this isolated in the first place? There is exactly one practical way to reach Utqiaġvik: by air. Regular commercial flights connect the city to Anchorage and Fairbanks, making air travel not simply the most convenient option, but the only realistic one for most residents and virtually all visitors. There is no highway, no rail line, and no seasonal road of any kind connecting the city to the rest of Alaska's transportation network. During the brief summer window, when Arctic Ocean ice retreats sufficiently, barge shipments become possible, providing an alternative route for heavier cargo and supplies that would be prohibitively expensive to fly in. For the rest of the year, air transport remains the only viable connection to the outside world. Weather permitting, and Arctic weather, particularly during the depths of polar night, can ground flights for days at a time. This total absence of road access shapes nearly every aspect of daily logistics in Utqiaġvik, from grocery prices to construction costs to how emergency medical evacuations have to be handled. It's a level of isolation shared by relatively few American cities of this size, made only more pronounced by the 65 days each winter when even the limited daylight available for safe flying disappears almost entirely. And yet, despite all of that, Utqiaġvik functions as a genuine modern city, with a hospital, schools, a courthouse, and municipal services most Americans would never expect to find this far from a paved road. Understanding exactly how unusual that combination is brings us to some of the stranger, lesser-known details about the place. A handful of details about Utqiaġvik tend to surprise people more than anything else about the city. Point Barrow itself, Nuvik in Iñupiat, sits several miles north of town and marks the actual northernmost point of land in the entire United States, the exact spot where the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas converge, and a location so remote from the town center that reaching it typically requires a guided tour or specialized vehicle, even by local standards. In August 1935, aviator Wiley Post and humorist Will Rogers, two of the most famous men in America at the time, died when their plane crashed near Utqiaġvik during an Arctic flying expedition, a tragedy that remains one of the most significant events in the city's 20th century history, and one still marked with a memorial near the crash site today. The Iñupiat Heritage Center in town holds exhibits spanning over 1,500 years of local history and culture, offering one of the most complete records anywhere of how a single Arctic community has continuously adapted, generation after generation, to some of the harshest inhabited conditions on the planet. And despite sitting directly on the Arctic Ocean, Utqiaġvik receives remarkably little actual precipitation. Cold Arctic air simply can't hold much moisture, technically qualifying the region as a kind of polar desert, even as wind sculpts what little snow does fall into deep, dramatic drifts across the flat coastal tundra. The full picture of Utqiaġvik's finances is genuinely remarkable once you understand how it actually works. The North Slope Borough was established specifically to give this Arctic region local taxing authority over oil infrastructure that would otherwise have generated revenue almost exclusively for the state government and oil companies themselves, with little of it reaching the Iñupiat communities living directly alongside that infrastructure. Because the borough can levy property taxes on oil facilities across its enormous jurisdiction, and because that jurisdiction includes a meaningful share of Alaska's North Slope oil infrastructure, a municipal government serving barely more than 4,000 people in its largest city has, at various points, commanded a budget and per capita spending capacity that rivals or exceeds far larger, far more conventionally resourced American cities. That revenue is precisely why Utqiaġvik has modern schools, a genuine hospital, an indoor recreation center capable of giving residents somewhere to stay active through 65 days of darkness, and infrastructure specifically engineered to survive permafrost conditions that would defeat conventional construction almost anywhere else. None of that would exist at anything close to this level. Without the specific legal and financial structure the North Slope borough was built around. So the full answer to the question this video opened with is this. Utqiaġvik is simultaneously one of the most physically extreme and isolated cities in the United States, and one of the most surprisingly well-funded local governments in the entire country. Not despite its remoteness, but because of the very oil wealth sitting beneath the tundra surrounding it. It's a combination that exists nowhere else in America, built entirely around one region's decision to make sure the resources beneath its own ground actually benefited the people living on top of it. There's something genuinely instructive about a place like Utqiaġvik, a city that, from a distance, looks like the definition of hardship. Dark for over 2 months a year, unreachable by road, exposed to some of the harshest conditions any American community faces. And yet, underneath that hardship sits a story about a community that fought for and won real control over the wealth generated on its own land, turning isolation and extremity into one of the more financially stable small city governments anywhere in the country. Maybe that's the real lesson Utqiaġvik has to offer. That resilience isn't only about enduring the dark. Sometimes it's about making sure that whatever your land is worth, the people who actually live on it are the ones who benefit from it first. If you find meaning in these forgotten coordinates, consider subscribing to the map. Together, we'll keep rescuing these places from the silence of history.